Okay, today we are here in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and we're going to do a video series called Emmitsburg during the Gettysburg campaign. And we're looking here at a painting that was done by the members of the Gettysburg High School National Art Society. It was dedicated on June the 17th, 2008, and it depicts the beginnings of the town of Emmitsburg. And it focuses on George Shriver, who volunteered for service on August the 27th, 1861, into Cole's Cavalry, Company C. They were out of Frederick, Maryland, and 5 months after the battle, George was granted a 4-day furlough, given the opportunity to spend Christmas with his wife Hetty, his daughters Sadie and Molly. George was a changed man when he returned. He had been away for almost 2 years and saw things that he could not begin to describe to his wife Hetty. He returned to duty near Brandy Station on December 29th, 1863, and for the next several days, Cole's Cavalry engaged in on and off fighting with the 43rd Battalion of Virginia Cavalry, an elite guerrilla unit led by John S. Mosby. Now, Emmitsburg was a small rural pre-industrial town in 1860 with a population of 973 people. The property ownership, status, and mobility that historians have analyzed in the 19th century. In addition to this, a factor as a catastrophic event, which was the Great Fire of Emmitsburg on the Monday night, June the 15th, 1863. It began at the Beam and Guthrie livery stable about 11 o'clock at night on June the 15th. And according to members of the town, the fire was a work of an arsonist, a man named Eli Smith, who they called the Mean Devil. The fire spread eastward along Main Street until it reached the town square where we're at now, and then continued for 2 blocks, jumped Main Street, and then burned toward the square again. It left 3 of the 4 corners of this town burned and blackened by the fire, and all 28 houses and 9 business establishments were destroyed. And this is the toll house along the Old Frederick Road. It was a toll road here along today what is Business 15. And it was here that George Armstrong Custer was camped on June the 28th, 1863, when he received word that he was promoted to Brigadier General. And this is where he was at, Custer. Also, Oliver Otis Howard used this building temporarily as his headquarters. Now, the 1st and 11th Corps basically came up this road on their way to Gettysburg, and when they did, they would have passed into the town of Emmitsburg, where we had just come from, and would have seen the burned out town, which was just burned out a couple weeks before. Just up the road here is the St. Mary's and the college, and Union forces were encamped all along the right side of this road up here at St. Mary's. On June 30th, Emmitsburg became the supply base for the Union Army. Major General John Reynolds, commander of the left wing of the Union Army, consisting of the 1st, 3rd, and the 11th Corps, were moving into Emmitsburg. Parts of the 1st and 11th Corps came through Emmitsburg on the day to obtain supplies that the Army needed. There, the 1st Corps set up their camp, and mustered in to receive their pay. At the southern end of the town, up here on the right, towards St. Mary's College, the 11th Corps, under the command of General Oliver Otis Howard, made their way into Emmitsburg. General Howard made his headquarters here at Mount St. Mary's. During the early evening hours, General Reynolds decided to break camp and move the 1st Corps to Marsh Creek, which is 5 miles north of Emmitsburg, just across the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania, into a small town called Gettysburg. And there he would made his headquarters at the Moritz Tavern. And we did a video called the 1st and 11th Corps Arrival at Gettysburg, so you want to go back and watch them. And in the 1st Corps Arrival, you'll see where I talk and show you the building called the Moritz Tavern. Now, as soon as Reynolds marches out of Emmitsburg, Howard's Corps started to lie on the campgrounds of St. Joseph's Academy, where we're at now. An officer quoted that the Sisters of Charity, nuns, supplied them with a good dinner that was truly enjoyed. While relaxing, General Carl Schurz performed a small recital in the chapel's organ. Now, in Gettysburg, as soon as Reynolds set up his headquarters, he received a message from General Buford saying that the rebel forces were in Cashtown advancing toward Gettysburg. So Reynolds forwarded this message to Howard as well as General Meade, whose headquarters were at Bridgeport, just east of Emmitsburg. Howard was instructed to get his men to Reynolds' left in case the Confederates happened to come from the direction of Fairfield. By this time, it seemed the Confederates were moving toward Emmitsburg. Now, we will be moving into the town again, and I want to go back to the Great Fire of Emmitsburg. The last structure to burn was the town's largest hotel. It, along with the other inns in Emmitsburg, were integral parts of the town's economy. Emmitsburg, a north-central Maryland town, was situated along one of the main commercial arteries between the growing industrial city of Baltimore and Pittsburgh, which was America's gateways. Of course, some of the buildings that we've seen and passed by would have been here, like the Carriage House Inn, as these troops passed by. Not only did the fire interrupt the economic life of the town, but it had its effects on the individuals. Daniel Weil had been the owner of a large hotel on the square, the last structure to burn. He concluded that Emmitsburg was a jinx for him. And then shortly after, they moved out of the town of Emmitsburg. Some of the fire victims who left returned to Emmitsburg. George Beam, for instance, whose farm animals and horses were destroyed in the stable where the fire started. He left Emmitsburg after the fire, but returned in the 1870s and continued his livery stable business into the 20th century. Another who returned was a man named William Patterson. He was a medical doctor whose office was one of 3 corners of the town square that was destroyed. He was 61 at the time of the fire, and soon after leaving Emmitsburg, he returned in the 70s and died in 1876. And we'll be going up into the town shortly, and you'll see the area where these men and their businesses were. Now, during the fire, between midnight and the morning, the Reverend John McCloskey brought the boys from the college to assist in putting out the fire. It's no doubt some of these boys thought of this fire and the jolly time that they had. Some amusing incidents occurred, such as carrying feather beds down the stairs and throwing a mirror. An old lady came with a basin of water, insisting throwing it on a house, which would have done nearly nothing. And this is the Carriage House Inn. This was built in the 1850s and was here as Union troops passed into the town of Emmitsburg, which was laying at that time in ruins, just a couple weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg. And you can imagine these Union troops passing here toward where they think is going to be a big battle and seeing this destruction and some of the rumors that may have been going through the men in the ranks. Did the Confederates burn it? You know, what are we looking forward to now heading into Pennsylvania? You know, for weeks, the town was the attraction, not Gettysburg. Not only for people near, but they came from long distances to view the ruins in the square. Letters from far away came offering these people places to stay, going down into Baltimore. They collected money, which added contributions that were sent from other towns, and they gave great relief. 45 houses and stables in all were destroyed during this fire. Going back to Eli Smith, a week after the fire, Eli Smith, who was a resident and Union sympathizer, was arrested on the suspicion of starting the fire in the town square to prevent the advancing Confederates from taking supplies from the town. In July of 1863, Smith was formally arraigned in Frederick and charged with arson. Now, from Gettysburg on June 15, 1863, as Robert E. Lee began his campaign into Pennsylvania, citizens of Gettysburg looked southward and saw an orange glow in the sky coming from the direction of Emmitsburg. Rumors began to spread throughout the countryside about the Confederate invasion. So you can imagine what these residents would have been thinking. They see an orange glow south of their town. The Confederates are on their way. This fire, a couple weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg, caused quite a stir. And it not only affected the Union Army passing through the town, but also citizens of the town of Gettysburg. One of the soldiers of the 82nd Ohio was a man named Lieutenant William Ballantine, and he recalled as he passed through Emmitsburg, the town is a very nice one, hardly as large as Urbana, but all fine buildings. About 1.5 of the town was burnt 2 weeks ago. The people think it was done by a resident of the town, who they now have in jail. He is said to be a Union man, though the town is one of the worst secessionist towns in Maryland. But that was not the reason it was burnt. It was revenge for some private wrong done by an individual of the town. His store was set on fire, and also the rest of the town went up with it. So there again, we have an account from someone that says Eli Smith didn't burn the town to prevent Confederate sympathizers from giving the Confederate Army supplies, but it may have been a revenge toward another resident of the town of Emmitsburg. After the fire, many of the homes and businesses were rebuilt over time. The Beam and Gunther were no exception. They rebuilt their livery stable. This is a photo of the town as it burned, and you can see the Catholic Church, which we'll visit right now, that's in that very photograph, which still stands here today in the town of Emmitsburg. And again, this is a Civil War building, much like the Carriage House. The soldiers of the 1st and the 11th Corps would have passed right by this church on their way into Gettysburg on the eve of the battle, passing right by this church, which would have been on their right as they continued northbound. And of course, the officer of the 82nd, who I read his account about Eli Smith, would have been one of the men that would have passed by and seen this church. So there was a man in the town named Charles Shorb. He was 31 years old at the time of the fire, but he and his wife had amassed considerable wealth. Most of it was invested in his store's inventory. In that fire of Emmitsburg, he lost $12,000, or half of his wealth, in 1860. Shorb and his wife, in fact, lost more than any other fire victim. Possibly, this motivated them to leave the town that once gave them a fortune and now gave them misfortune, never to come back again. Now, the area that we're driving here, and I'm showing the picture again of the burned out town. If you look to the right, beyond this cemetery on our right, you're going to see some hills, and in the distance, on top of those hills, if you were to face the camera back in the direction that we just came from, back at the church, that was where the famous and only photograph of Emmitsburg and the aftermath of the Emmitsburg fire was taken from, right here. It's facing on the hills, heading back the camera aimed back toward the Catholic Church. And if you zoom in on the photograph, you will actually see a lot of the burned out buildings in and around the town and on the square. And again, when the town burnt, it started at the stable, it went across one side of the square, then down the east side. Now, this building was known as the Farmers Inn and Hotel. It was a place where photographer James Gibson took a photograph in July of 1863, most likely on July 5th, 1863. Now, some people believe that the photograph was, which was taken by Alexander Gardner, James Gibson, and Timothy O'Sullivan while they were on their way to Gettysburg. However, only Gardner may have been in Gettysburg on July 5th of 1863, but since one special artist was listed as captured, Gardner also had a son who was at Mount St. Mary's College. So that would have also given him the reason to be in the area. Alternative dates for the photograph could have been July 9th or 10th of 1863 as well. Now, the plaque in front of the building shows that the structure was constructed in the year 1800. The original owner and builder of the Farmers Inn and Hotel in Emmitsburg was a man named Robert L. Annan, who owned it until Jacob Bond purchased the structure in 1816. At this time, the building was owned by Henry and Catherine Hoffman. The third-story structure was a later addition from 1875, and of course the Doughboy statue out front was placed in 1927. It was created by artist Ernest Moore Viscoe of Spencer, Indiana, who produced over 100 of these Doughboy statues. And the front porch, where the people were sitting in the photograph, is where, the front porch is where the people were sitting in that James Gibson photograph, and which is the first photograph of the aftermath of the Emmitsburg fire in June of 1863. The well that we passed by was rediscovered in 1989, and then it was enclosed with a brick enclosure. And in our last area that we're going to look at, we're going to go to the current day Vigilant Fire Department. And inside of the fire department is actually this fire engine. This is the fire engine that was used to help assist in putting out the great fire of Emmitsburg on June the 15th of 1863. And then this fire was later re-equipped with brass hoses in 1881 and a different set of wheels. However, this is maybe one of the only remaining living witnesses to the Great Fire of Emmitsburg, which was a precursor to the Battle of Gettysburg. So I hope you've enjoyed this video on the Emmitsburg campaign, Emmitsburg during the Gettysburg campaign, rather, here on Gettysburg Historic Walking Tours. My name is historian Frank P. Marone Jr., and I hope you enjoyed this video. And again, go back and watch my videos on the 1st and 11th Corps arrival at Gettysburg.